Alrighty guys, hello and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be comparing T2 primary battle units. So we're going to be looking at the Obsidian, the Rhino, the Ilsheva, Pillar. We're going to be looking at the strengths and weaknesses that each one provides, as well as ranking them at the end of the video and testing them in a variety of different situations. I've taken a lot of the feedback that I've gotten on other science videos as far as testing methodology, making sure that I am thorough, and I'm going to do my best to eliminate any subjectivity from these tests and look at these units from, as much as I can, a purely objective standpoint. Before we get into that, I wanted to thank you guys so much for watching. This channel has really exploded and there's a lot of different content on this video. I know a lot of people come for the science videos and the analysis videos, and it's been a long time since I've done one, mostly just because I've started probably 7 or 8 of these videos and then decided that for one reason or another, I just didn't really feel like it warranted actually being published. But this one we're actually going through, we're publishing it, I am editing it, and we are going to be posting it in the near future. As well, this weekend, Kappa and myself are going to be competing in a 2v2 tournament sponsored by, I believe it's Willow of Duality, as I believe what his name is. And he is a caster. He does a lot of really great content, very entertaining casts. If you guys haven't seen his channel, go ahead and check him out. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the test. Before we get into the actual statistics, there are a couple of special considerations that I want to bring to bear. These are largely subjective in nature though. And so these tests that we're going to be doing is going to be sterilizing the playing field of these considerations. So the first one is going to be the Rhino's terrain issue. The way that the Forged Alliance Forever and the Supreme Commander engine does the Rhino's actual projectile is, I believe it's a direct fire instead of an actual projectile itself. That combined with the low profile of the Rhino can sometimes make it shoot into cliffs whenever you actually want it to be engaging units. So this is something that is not going to apply every single time, and it actually applies relatively rarely. A lot of the newer maps do a really good job of minimizing a lot of this terrain and allowing the Rhino to actually get firing solutions on its opponent, regardless of whether it's shooting uphill or not. But this is still something that if you're playing older maps or maybe the original Forged Alliance maps, that you will want to take into consideration. The second one is going to be the Obsidian's 10 energy cost per tick. So if you're like me and if you're not like me, and you build power meticulously to balance things, then this could end up coming back to bite you. If you end up power stalling in the middle of a fight, then all of your Obsidians will lose shields. That makes them far less effective and taking out effectively half of their hit point pool. But if you're like me and just overbuild power indiscriminately, then you should be fine. The bright side of this though, and the reason why I'm not able to weigh this objectively, is that it recharges without any veterancy. This makes these units very recyclable and reusable in fights where they can recoup essentially half of their health pool without any veterancy. So it does make them a little bit more reusable, so you won't have armies sitting around with, half, third health. You'll have them over half health at least. So that does give them an edge in these, but because it's a subjective edge based on your power infrastructure, I'm going to be eliminating that from I'm going to be including that in the objective testing, but just keep that in mind that it might come back to bite you if you are deploying lots of Obsidians. So let's get into some of the unit statistics. So the first one, and we're going to be going by faction alphabetical order, is going to be the Obsidian. So the Obsidian costs 360 mass to produce. That is roughly 3.33, repeating decimals, damage per second point per mass invested. So damage per second, if I remember correctly, is about 140 damage per second. Do the math and you get 0.33 damage per second per mass invested. Sorry, 120 damage per second. The math is now making sense. Because of the fact that it has shields, and because of the fact that for this test I'm going to be assuming that we have unlimited power at our disposal, we're going to be combining health and shields, since in a straight up fight they will effectively do the same thing, and this puts us at roughly 7.64 health per mass invested. The reason why I am normalizing for mass on both of these attributes is because this is going to give us a good way to additionally compare these units at the end of the video, in addition to how it actually stacks up in the more real world scenarios. Lastly, it has 20 range. This is the shortest of the group that we're going to be testing. Let's move on to the Rhino. The Rhino costs 297 mass, makes it the second most expensive. It is 0.303 damage per second points per mass invested. And there's no shields here, so we're just calculating health, and it is 6.397 health per mass that you actually invest. The Rhino has 23 range, so that puts it on average with the T2 main battle units. So the Rhino is definitely a relatively good contender, having good range as well as good damage per second and a relatively efficient health over mass ratio. The Ilsheva is going to be third. This one again costs 360 mass. It is tied with the Obsidian, but it only gives 0.292 damage per second per mass invested and 6.94 health per mass invested. This one does have 26 range though, so that does offset its dip in both health and damage per second on mass invested. This makes it the longest range of the bunch. And lastly, to round it out, we have the Pillar. The Pillar is 198 mass. It is 0.283 damage per second per mass invested and 7.58 health per mass invested, making it a very, very close second to the Obsidian for health per mass point that you actually invest, and it has a range of 23. So it's average on par with the Rhino, longer than the Obsidian, but shorter than the Ilsheva. So the reconciliation here that we're going to be walking through is the Ilsheva and the Obsidian are definitely the most expensive, and that makes this comparison a little bit more difficult since the costs are so wildly different. So in some of the other comparison videos that I have done, a lot of the mass and energy that you actually have to invest is relatively the same across these units, and this one it varies wildly from 198 to 360 mass. So this is why I again have used the more universal measurement of damage per second per mass invested, health per second or health points HP per mass invested as well, to help us equalize these units and understand whenever you reconcile the actual damage per second you're getting out of the unit versus the mass that you are investing, where you're going to come out ahead, where you could potentially come out behind, etc. So let's get into the first of our real world tests. The first one is going to be a straight comparison. So we're just going to be taking these units and pitting them against each other. So the Obsidian takes out all the competitors without really batting an eye. This includes the Ilshevas. This is undoubtedly due to the fact that the Obsidian has higher damage per second at 120 total damage per second. Like we talked about earlier, this does come at the premium of energy to operate, and it is tied for the highest cost. As a side note, it also looks like the shields take a few seconds before the recharge kicks in, but I can only observe that based on the bar with the naked eye, so I might actually be wrong here. I have not checked the actual code itself to see if there is a delay in the Obsidian's recharge time. Plus, if you don't know the code and you didn't build the code, our GitHub repository can sometimes be a little bit daunting for somebody, even with a little bit of programming experience, to walk in and start to understand the classes and methods that are actually deployed. That being said, though, observed with the naked eye, it doesn't look like the shield is actually recharging actively during a fight. But again, this might be something that I'm just not able to observe with the naked eye looking at the bar. Next one is going to be the Ilsheva, ranks second here, losing out only against the Obsidian. It has 105 damage per second, and its superior range really assists it here in the second place scenario. Again, it does come at a premium cost tied with the Obsidian for both energy and mass invested. So let's move into our third place. And kind of following the line, the Rhino comes in third at 90 DPS. A range of 23 is very helpful in making the Rhino an effective battle tank, and it also comes at the discount of the previous two units discussed, allowing it to be a cheaper option that can still stand toe-to-toe with its rivals relatively well. And last, this means that the Pillar comes in fourth in this particular ranking. Remember that this is simply a stack ranking and doesn't take into account some of the more fine details. I'm merely exhibiting the test results here. It comes in at only 56 damage per second with a range of 23. The Pillar is the most discounted of the T2 units though, coming in at roughly 55% of the cost of the most expensive units. So that is going to be weighed very heavily in the overall stack ranking. But as a straight up test, we would want to do the actual straight up comparison. So let's go into the second test, which is versus spam. So I picked 7 strikers in this particular test to mass normalize as much as possible with the most expensive units, although it still is not 100% perfect. There is a little bit more of mass that goes into the 7 strikers versus the Obsidian or the Ilsheva. The Obsidian again ranks first here, taking down all 7 strikers, and when faced with 10 strikers, because I decided to up the ante, it didn't really bat an eye versus 7. It can still bring down 7 of them even with the upped damage per second. Again, the high damage per second is nearly able to one-shot the inferior units, allowing it to use every shot with relatively high efficiency. So next we have the Ilsheva ranking second, brings down all 7 strikers, and then 5 strikers whenever I threw it, whenever we upped the ante and threw it up against 10 strikers, just for shits and giggles. The Ilsheva still has a very high damage per second for a T2 unit, but its greatest asset here is its superior range and high fire rate, making it able to kite units and eliminate opposing units before weapons can be brought to bear. It also makes sure that no damage per second is wasted since it has a high fire rate. So in the instance of strikers, the Obsidian is able to leverage its damage per second to relatively full potential. If we had softer units though, like Mantis or like Auroras, the Ilsheva would be a little bit more effective there because its damage per second is spread over a lot more projectiles, allowing the Ilsheva to be much more efficient in actually dealing damage to those lower health units. Third here we have the Rhino. If you guys are not seeing a pattern yet, it brings down 5 of the 7 strikers, and since it didn't make it through the first wave, I halted the test there. The Rhino still benefits again from that higher fire rate, even though it has a lower DPS than its contemporaries. It still has a pretty high damage per second per mass invested whenever we actually compare it. And then bringing up the rear is the Pillar. The Pillar was able to only bring down 2 of the 7 strikers, coming in last in this particular test. Now the Pillar comes in last on this test, but it is again the cheapest of the units considered, so it would be in line that it would be worse than the other units in these applications. So the last test that we're going to be doing is testing it versus a Harbinger. And the reason why I'm doing this is we've done the first test where it's fighting against units of the same weight class, if you will, if you're into boxing. Then we stacked them up against a lower weight class, and now we're going to have them punch above their weight and take on a T3 unit. So we tried to mass normalize as much as possible again here when sending these units up against the higher tier Harbinger. For the Obsidian, we ran 2 tests, one with 3 Obsidians and one with 2 Obsidians, because the mass invested doesn't line up exactly. With 2 Obsidians, the Harb survives with 2101 HP remaining, and with 3 Obsidians, the Harbinger dies, with 1 Obsidian taking 1 hit before the Harbinger dies. So again, the Obsidians being able to use all of that 120 damage per second, really bringing a good asset into the fight here whenever fighting against a single unit of a higher tier. So the Ilsheva is pretty much the exact same as the Obsidian with very similar results. The Harbinger had, I think, 2000 HP, so, I'm sorry, 2200 HP, so a little bit worse than the Obsidians on that side, but basically the same whenever I tested it with 3 Ilshevas. For the Rhino, we used 3 Rhinos here, and the Harbinger survived with 1800 HP remaining. So it's does a little bit better than the 2 Obsidians, but doesn't quite stack up with 3 Obsidians or 3 Ilshevas as to be expected. 4 Pillars is the closest to mass normalization, and the Harb survives with HP results slightly worse than the Rhino. So the Harbinger survived, I think, with roughly 1907 hit points remaining. So 4 Pillars, again, not doing a great job of punching above their weight class in this particular test. So we've done 3 tests, we've added some considerations, and we've broken down the statistics of these units. So let's wrap this up to a conclusion. So what do these tests and the statistics tell us? The first is that not all T2 units are created equal. This should not come as a surprise to anybody that is a veteran of the game, but for newer players like myself, I initially thought that a T2 main battle unit was basically a T2 main battle unit. Whenever people referred to the Ilsheva as a tier 2.5 unit, I didn't really quite understand what they meant until I had played for about a month and dove into actually the statistics from these T2 units. So the second thing that it tells us is that in order to allow for balance, there has been a good amount of tweaking to change mass and energy cost for these units. So the reason why there is such great disparities in the performance is quite simply balance, I believe. Some of this was done in the original Forged Alliance whenever it came out 13 years ago, 14 years ago. I can't remember exactly the year that it came out. But this balance has continued under Jagged Appliance, and then I cannot remember the newer Balance Counselor. But this is one of the reasons why there is such a big disparity between these units. Third, even with the variation in costs, this does not, even if we account for the variation in costs, this does not bring the units to equilibrium. So whenever we mass normalize for damage per second, for health, for range, it does not bring these units quite to equilibrium yet. And again, this goes back to balance. The various factions have various units that can support these units for better or for worse. So whenever we are looking at these units in isolation, we need to also take into account the fact that there can be parashields, the fact that there can be deceivers, and other units that can be supporting a T2 army, because a T2 army gets much more versatile and has a lot more utility than a T1 army. So that is again why a lot of these units have been tweaked, is in the name of balance and to account for the other arsenal that resides within each of these factions, T2 garages, if you will. So as a result, I believe that the best way to truly rank these units is to strip it down to the couple of variables that we've been talking about: HP per mass invested, damage per second per mass invested. I believe that this is an unbiased indication of what a unit's true damage output would be, and an indication of what its staying power is in a prolonged firefight. We'll also bring range into consideration here, but won't be given the same weight as the original two. Reason why is because the numbers get a little bit messed up whenever you actually do range over mass invested calculations. So let's go ahead and get into the rankings. So for our first place is a very difficult decision, and it's been brought down to the Ilsheva and the Obsidian. So as a result, I'm going to have to qualify the ranking based on the player that's actually driving the vehicle. Now, I do my best in these tests to eliminate the player variable from these tests and give you an objective illustration of which unit is better and which unit is worse if you take the player out of the equation. But for this first place ranking, it genuinely does come down to who is actually leveraging these units. In the hands of a player that can exhibit good micro skills and can actually leverage kiting, I have to give this to the Ilsheva due to its significantly longer range while still maintaining a good damage per second. In a brute slugfest though, so if you have two players that are literally just clicking armies against each other, the Obsidian is going to be your better choice here, just because it has a larger health pool, more efficient damage per second investment, and it has a shield that can actually regenerate. So once the fight is actually over, your units can regenerate their health, which is invaluable if you're a lower level player and need auto health regeneration, and leverage that a lot instead of reclaiming and reproducing more units. So my second place is going to be whichever wouldn't be ranked as as first of the initial two. So if you're a micro player, I think the Obsidian is still an excellent option for you, and I would put it second here. And if you're not a great micro player, then I would put the Ilsheva second here as well. The Ilsheva is still a fantastic unit and can still punch really hard, even though it can't punch quite as hard as the Obsidian. It still will hold its weight in damage per second and health invested. So third, again, we have another rough choice. And so for this one, I have to give this one to the Pillar. And the reason why, this might be a little bit of a controversial, there might be a lot of people immediately banging on their keyboards in the comments section telling me how I've got this wrong. And I would really appreciate any feedback on this particular ranking. But before you write your comment, let me make a case for why I think the Pillar should be third here over the Rhino. I believe that the Pillar should be third here because the Pillar exhibits a core competency. So the Pillar is the cheapest of the unit, even though it is not the highest damage and it's not the highest range. It does actually have a very high health per mass invested, but it is hands down the cheapest, coming in at 55% of the cost of the most expensive units. So because of that, I would give it third here because it allows you to build more of them. It allows you to build them more cheaply. And if you lose them, it's not going to hurt you quite as badly from a mass invested perspective. Also allows you to put more of them into the field faster and spread out your pressure across your opponent's line. So that is why I'm going to rank it third, is because it has something that is really good about it. And that's the fact that it's inexpensive and the fact that you can mass produce them really quickly. Which means that we have the Rhino coming in last. And this is painful for me as a Cybran fanboy. And the Rhino is not a bad unit by any stretch, but the reason why I've put it in fourth here is I feel like it's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife of a main battle unit. It's got pretty good range, it's got good damage per second, it's got pretty good health, but it doesn't, and it's relatively affordable at cheaper than the Obsidian and the Ilshiva, but it doesn't exhibit anything that makes it a compelling choice over any of the other three, just because it's kind of a very middle of the road, good at everything, great at nothing. So because it's kind of good at everything, great at nothing, and it doesn't exhibit something that it is fantastic at, like the other three, where we have damage per second, higher range, and then the cheapest, I would have to put it in fourth here. And so that is basically my case for why I've ranked the units the way that they are. I would really love you guys's criticism or opinion on how I've done these rankings and how I've broken this down. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I did genuinely try and put a lot of thought into how I actually did the testing and how I actually broke down the measurements of each unit. So if you guys liked that, let me know. If you didn't like it, also let me know. I'm always looking to improve. Ultimately, these videos, I want these videos to bring value to you guys. And so if these videos don't bring value to you guys, then let me know. And I would be more than happy to change things about my methods. This is, I think, the second or third time that I've, changed things about a science video because of something that somebody much smarter than me told me in the YouTube comments. So that being what it is, guys, last thing is I'm going to plug the Discord. So the link to our Discord is going to be down in the description below. A lot of cool guys, a lot of you guys have joined the Discord as well, and it's been great getting to play with you guys, great getting to interact with you guys. Really enjoyed that as well. So if you're interested in playing with me, that's the best way to do it, is to join the Discord down there. I try to be on a few times a week. I'm usually on playing games 3, 4, 5 nights a week. So if I'm on and I'm playing, hit me up. I'd be more than happy to do a 2v2 matchmaking with you, regardless of your skill level. I don't care if you're, really terrible. I'm perfectly fine playing with you. I still have fun even if I lose. But that's it, guys. I really appreciate you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.